the law. Welcome, everyone, to this session of the OTO Education Committee. We are presenting Brother Jaime Paul Lamb and his presentation of Astrological Tarot. And just to give you a brief overview of Brother Lamb, he is the author of Myth, Magic, and Masonry, Occult Perspectives in Freemasonry, Approaching the Middle Chamber, the Seven Liberal Arts in Freemasonry and the Western Esoteric Tradition, and the Archetypal Temple and Other Writings on Masonic Esotericism. He's a member of Lapis Lazuli Oasis in Phoenix. He's the Imperator and Hierophant of Temple Number 6, Phoenix, Arizona, Hermetic Society of the Golden Dawn, Oldwell St. John's Lodge Number 6, Norwalk, Connecticut, a charter member and worshipful master of Ascension Lodge of the Arizona College of Societas Rosicruciana Incivitatibus Foederatis, and a past master of Arizona Research Lodge Number 1 for the year 2016. And with that, Brother Jaime, take it away.
Jay, fantastic job on the Latin. Oh my God, so many people, butcher that. You were dead on. We just say SRICF, whereas my wife says scriff, and it doesn't even sort of let her out to scriff, but she kind of says that anyway. I am so excited to be here. 93 to everybody. I've got some crazy exquisite information for you today. I hope you're going to like this. I'm a personable person. I love talking to Tiffany and Richard and Dylan and all of our friends here. As if you remember, like, what was it, Romper Room? They would take out the little mirror and say she's saying hello to everybody. So I remember seeing this great film festival at what I later found out to be an OTO temple, and it was Leaping Laughter there in Minneapolis. So I knew that I had to travel back there to sort of complete a circle. And then I did my other stuff elsewhere, whatever. But yeah, it's a pleasure to be here to speak with my brothers and sisters. I hope you're excited about this. What can I do to get you more excited about this? So I've got something so exquisite for you. I want to say thanks again to Jay and to Scott Plyler, brother Scott Plyler and brother Jay Lee, for hooking this up. I'm totally stoked. I've got something so great for you, and I hope you're equally as excited about that. So I'm going to share screen. I'm not going to bore you with all of this preliminary stuff. I'm going to do. I haven't given this presentation in a couple of years, so I took a look at it earlier today to kind of like re-immerse myself in this, and I found that gasp. I had changed my mind on some things over the last couple of years, which is such a common motif for me, where it's like, it seems like every couple of years I reinvent myself, and it's like, oh my God, that I really don't stand by that anymore. But um, I can tell you that a lot of this I still stand by, and the things that I don't stand by, I deleted from this slideshow. So that makes it easy for me. I don't have to get into any necessarily embarrassing, stupid stuff. Here's what we got. So the title of this presentation, as you can see, is Astrological Tarot. I gave this presentation, I don't know, a couple of years ago for my GD group, but I thought that it would be, when I was talking to Scott and I was talking to Jay, I know you guys will appreciate this. I mean, I'm so stoked on this material, and it's so applicable, particularly if you're not like an astrologer, because I am an astrologer, like, to the bone, right? It's one of my main things. And I've been like, have certificates and stuff, AFA and Hellenistic astrology and this sort of stuff. I'm totally down with astrology. In fact, I think when we talk about things like the Hermetic arts, which are astrology, alchemy, and theurgy or magic, um, I'm I'm as astrology and that sort of thing as Porphyry is. I'm so stoked on it. So I want to get you excited about this subject. So if that means you have, like Jay and I think we're both having some Mercury of the Grape. You get yourself excited. Some what did Crowley call it? He called it energized enthusiasm. Was that the term that he used? So yeah, I'm just really excited to give this presentation for you guys. So what we're going to do is, these are our objectives, right? These are the things that we want to really communicate through this presentation. So I want to provide a historical and theoretical context for what we're talking about, just to set it up and be rigorous, right? um, I want to introduce the tributaries to this practice, what I'm talking about, which you'll soon learn. And I got to tell you, stay tuned in, because you're going to be able to use this. By the time I'm done with this, you are going to be able to use this. My aim is to blow your mind with this thing. You're going to freak out when you see how readily you can maybe transpose astrological data into the tarot. That sounds abstruse and that sounds difficult or whatever, but I don't want you to even go there in your mind until you've heard me out. This is going to be something that you will immediately be able to apply, and to which I can attest tremendous value, right? So here's what we're talking about. The historical and theoretical context, and we're just going to blur through that, right? We're going to introduce the tributaries to this particular practice, that is an astrological taroic practice. We're going to show its systemization, particularly in the GD tradition, because that's where it happens. Now, you're just going to have to deal with me on that, because Crowley was GD, and you can make that leap for yourself, right? And we're going to give some examples of its application. So let's talk about this. Now, here's where it gets, this is the only hard part you're going to have to deal with me on. We have to understand the Aristotelian cosmology, right? Because this is the sort of core of what we're talking about here. So many people blow this off, and you do it to your detriment. I promise you. You do this, you blow this off to your detriment. So the more you can understand this Aristotelian cosmology, the better you're going to be able to absorb not only the rest of this presentation, but I would say the entirety of the Western esoteric tradition, or traditions, plural, right? So here's what I mean by that. In the center of the cosmos, there is an elemental or sublunary sphere. It's sublunary because it's below the sphere of the moon, the sublunary sphere of the elements, right? And it consists of earth, water, air, and fire, in that order: earth, water, air, and fire on the outside, in what they call their Aristotelian natural place. I don't want to bore you, but I do feel like I need to get this across. Think about that, because the earth is in the center because it's the most dense of the Empedoclean or classical elements, right? It's the most dense. Like, you ever throw a rock into a stream or something like that, the rock sinks to the bottom. This is a pre-gravitational theory. So Earth is the most dense. Water is the second most dense because it sits atop Earth, like we said about the pebble in a river. Air is above water because bubbles rise to the surface of a stream, let's say, or the ocean, right? Air is lighter than water, and then fire is lighter than air. You know, think of any hot air balloon or whatever. I mean, this is demonstrable stuff that pre-gravitation, this is the way that they talked about these things. So that's the sublunary sphere. So we have to understand that. So I hope we have a Q&A, Jay, after this. If it's not,
Yes, and that's a good time for me to let people know. I've posted in the chat box that the chat box is also where you should post your questions, and I will relay them directly to Jaime after the slideshow presentation during our Q&A session.
that sounds perfect. So I just want to get this sublunary sphere. You might think of it as Malkut, because guess what? It is Malkut. That's what they're talking about. This sublunary sphere. It's below the moon. It's the sphere of the four Empedoclean elements: earth, water, air, and fire, in their Aristotelian natural place, is how we refer to that, because they they go from the most dense to the most rarefied, being fire. After that, you have the planetary spheres. You see how we have the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. So these are those etheric planetary spheres. You've got to know this. I mean, I've got to say that right now. This is one of, you can't read Agrippa, let's say. You can't read Crowley, really, without knowing this paradigm, without knowing this cosmology. It's so important. So you have these 7 planetary spheres, right? And then you have the sphere of the fixed stars and the zodiac, which we call the Ogdoad, right? It's the 8th sphere. That's why Ogdoad. It corresponds to Hokmah. You know how Binah is Saturn? Well, beyond that, in Hokmah, you have the sphere of the fixed stars and the zodiac. I know I'm going to go fast on this, and type your questions into the chat box, and we can clean this up later. But I really just need to get this across because it's so foundational to what we're talking about right now. Yes, we're talking about tarot and astrology, but these two things, in the way that we think about them in our practices, are contingent upon this Aristotelian or Ptolemaic cosmology. Believe me on that. This is definitely the case. So we have to understand that you have a sublunary, that is to say, sublunary, below the moon, sphere of the elements. You have planetary spheres, 7 of them, you know, from the moon to Saturn, and they're in that order for a reason, but we don't need to get into that. And then you're in this sphere of the fixed stars and the zodiac, right? And from there, you get into more rarefied spheres like the Ennead or the Primum Mobile and things like that, which we don't necessarily need to get into. But I wanted to center us on this sort of thing. I wanted to provide this as a foundation, that in the center of the cosmos, there is, and I don't just mean that in a geocentric sense, I mean it in a georeferential sense. So I better dispel this right now. A lot of people's argument against astrology is that they say it's geocentric, and any serious astrologer says no, that's false. It's georeferential. You know what I mean? The earth is referentially the locus of consciousness, because that's where every astrologer lives, is on the earth. This isn't denigrating the sun as being, you know, solus right here, as being the center of the solar system. That's certainly the case. Nobody cares, and that doesn't you know, sort of do any violence to this paradigm here, this cosmology, right? Because we live on Earth. We are earthlings who live here, if you could see my pointer, right? And then the other spheres of the planets revolve around us. Now, you might say, how hubristic, Jamie, to think that everything revolves around you and or the earth or whatever, but it's just demonstrably the case. We live on the earth. It's georeferential, it's not geocentric. So next time some anti-astrologer tries to give you shit about that, you could say no, nobody ever said that it's a geocentric model per se, because Aristarchus in the, I don't know, 2nd century CE in Alexandria, he already posited the heliocentric model with the sun in the center. So it's not like they didn't know about that. They were just unconcerned about it. They were unconcerned with it for practical reasons, because obviously our locus of consciousness is the earth, right? So that's why this model will work forever. And that's why this model is accurate. So I hope you smack down the next anti-astrological argument you hear when they say, what about geocentrism? You can be like, well, this is or when they say heliocentrism, this is georeferentiality. You are an earthling, right? Anyway, I don't want to belabor this, but I could tell you more about that if you like. So yeah, we have the elements, we have the planetary spheres, which concentrically envelop the elemental spheres in these crystalline sort of spheres, right? That are the planets. You see this in Hermeticism, in Neoplatonism, in Gnosticism, in Mithraism, in Christianity, etc., etc. I mean, this is the prime cosmological model of the Western esoteric tradition. And I got to say this, if you don't get a grasp on this, you do that at your peril. So get to know the Aristotelian and the Ptolemaic cosmological model, or you will have a very hard time with, let's say, the tree of life. Let's say with Hermeticism, even Christianity, and certainly Thelema in its cosmological model. I know Crowley was using this, right? Despite his use of modern planets and his whole Evangeline Adams astrological forays as a ghostwriter. This is real. This is something that we cannot pass go. So take your time with this. On your own time, but do know that this is what we're talking about, and it is supremely important, right? Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, let's say, something so central to Western esotericism, is modeled upon natural magic, celestial magic, and super celestial magic. Those are his 3 books. So without a knowledge of this paradigm, the whole Agrippan thing is just lost on you. And I'm emphasizing that, and maybe overemphasizing that, because it really is probably the most foundational thing you can learn about Western esotericism in general, no matter what your tradition is. You have to know this, right? And the better you know this, the easier it is for you to grasp concepts later. So you'll be able to watch this later, because as Jay told me, this is all getting uploaded to the YouTube channel. So it demands repeated watching if you don't grasp this concept, the Aristotelian cosmology. So we started there, just getting a cosmological kind of frame of reference. Now we're going to move on to the elements of astrology. So I've got the unenviable task of trying to tell you what astrology is literally in one slide. That is to say, it's not precisely going to happen, but I do want to give you an idea, right? So if you're not conversant in astrology, which many of us are not, right? It's a very abstruse and nuanced and complex subject. You know, there's different traditions like the Hellenistic, the Perso-Arabic, the medieval, the Renaissance, the modern astrological traditions, and all of them have their own vernacular and their own set of sort of correspondences and standards and things. It's a difficult art to gain entry to. And I am definitely not talking about hippie sun sign astrology. If there's one thing in this world, probably the thing I hate most is my mother's astrology. How gruesome, how simplistic this astrology, where it's like, oh, Jamie, you're a Capricorn. Why? Because my son was in Capricorn? That's so simplistic. Do you think you could fit 7 billion people into 12 file folders? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And that's not what astrology says or claims to do. Astrology is so complex. It keeps getting more and more complex the further you go into it. Talk about a rabbit hole. Astrology is the rabbit hole, maybe the oldest rabbit hole, right? So astrology works like this. It's planets, signs, houses, and aspects. Those are the four major components. I'm not trying to teach you this right now. It's unreasonable. There's no way I could teach you this right now, but I will say this. Don't think about your sun sign. Stop calling yourself a Scorpio, a Cancer, a Leo, or a Virgoan. Forget about all that because it's wrong. That is hippie stuff. It is absolutely new agey trash, and it has no business being a part of the astrological vernacular. And it's a comparatively recent thing. This horoscopic newspaper astrology is absolute garbage. It has nothing to do with the the glorious and ancient art of astrology that is so complex and so nuanced. Don't worry, never go through the world and say I'm a Gemini, because you're not. You're just saying my sun is in Gemini, and your sun is one planet, and it happens to be in a sign. Big deal. How is it aspected? What house is it in? You know, like, how is it in relation, vis-a-vis the other planets? It's so complex. So do avail yourself to the study of astrology if you're interested. But if you're not, I've got great news for you. If you're like, Jamie, I don't want to get into all this astrological, abstruse sort of, years and years of dedicated study. I'm just not interested in it. Well, this presentation is for you, because guess what? If you know your correspondences, you could lay it out in tarot cards. That's what I'm trying to teach you on this course. You don't have to know astrology. You should know it. I love the hell out of it, but it's not for everybody. I understand, right? So if you don't feel like making that leap into the this world of astrology, real astrology, again, not new age hippie garbage, real astrology, Hellenistic astrology. If you don't feel like getting into that, I've got great news for you today. I've got the good news for you. And the good news is that you can use tarot, but you have to know your correspondences. So we'll get into that in a second. But let me finish up about astrology. Again, planets in signs, in houses, and how they're aspected. These are the four major components or elements of astrology, right? So think of it as there's a good analogy called the theater analogy, where you have actors um, on sets. You have actors in wardrobe on sets and how they dialogue with each other, right? Imagine that. Imagine a theater stage right now, and you see actors who are in wardrobe and they are on sets, like there's a couch over here or a kitchen over there, and they are having dialogue with each other. Think of that, right? And now look at the planets, who are the actors, the signs, who are the wardrobe that the actors are in, the houses, who are the sets that they are on. They're in the kitchen part or the study or whatever. And then the aspects, which is the way that they communicate with each other. This is called the theater analogy. It's a very old analogy. And it's a good way of explaining, at least to the newcomer, the way to penetrate astrology. The theater analogy: actors in wardrobe on sets, and their dialogue together is the same or analogous to planets in signs in houses and how they are aspected. That, to me, right now, if we were to end this presentation right now and I were to just drill that home and make sure you understood it, it would be worth the price of admission, which I imagine is $0, right? So that's one of the most important things you can learn about astrology. And the theater analogy is a great way to begin to penetrate the mysteries, capital M, of astrology. So yeah, and then you have other assessing planetary condition, and you have the various branches of astrology, natal, horary, mundane, electional. There are various ways you can apply this astrological doctrine, right? So I think that's going to suffice for our purposes today, to just let me tell you that astrology is very complex, very nuanced, not as simple as your hippie mom probably told you. And it really, it's widely applicable. And there are many ways by which to judge the sort of condition of planets in signs, in houses, and how they are aspected with each other. So maybe you didn't believe me. Maybe you were like, Jamie, I think you're full of shit, by saying that this Aristotelian / astrological cosmology has anything to do with Western esotericism, or let's say Kabbalah, right? Well, that's untrue. And I'll tell you why. What we're looking at is a couple of versions of what we call the Kircher tree. Comes from this cat named Athanasius Kircher. And he's the one who set it up in this particular order that I know all of you are familiar with. This is Kabbalistic stuff. It's the tree of life, right? Where you have Malkut down here, Yesod, Hod, Netzach, Geburah, Hesed, etc., right? So here's what I want to show you that you might not have caught before. Did you know that Malkut is the sphere of the earth, the material plane, like Asiya, right? That symbol is a symbol of Gaia, right? And then it goes up to the sphere of the moon, that of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, the fixed stars in the zodiac, etc. I'm not doing these modern planets. I'm only showing you this because this is if you have Earth at the center, and then the moon, and then Mercury, and then Venus. Earth at the center, and then the moon, and then Mercury and Venus. You see that? Earth at the center, the moon, Mercury, Venus, then the sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. You see what I'm saying here? It's just a concatenation of the Ptolemaic cosmos. That's all this tree of life is. And if you've ever read the Sefer Yetzirah, which is actually proto-Kabbalistic, they weren't even calling it Kabbalah at that time. You don't get Kabbalah until the Bahir and the Zohar and stuff like that. It's a medieval kind of term. So preceding that, you get the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. And that's what we're talking about here. And that's how this tree of life comes into being. So you find this proto-Kabbalistic Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Formation, which talks about some of these attributions about the Hebrew alphabet and things like that. Then you get into the Bahir and the Zohar, which further elucidate the construction and layout and schema that forms this tree, right? I bring this up because it's so central to our work. Um, it's massive. I mean, you can't do Hermetic Kabbalah without this Kabbalistic element. So if that went over your head, don't sweat it. It's not a big deal. But do know that this tree of life is a concatenation or a linear sort of example of this same thing. It's the same thing, one for one, right? So, all right. So we talked about astrology, and we talked about proto-Kabbalistic ideas and the tree of life, right? Now we're going to talk about the tarot, and we're going to talk about the beginning of the occult tarot tradition. So that starts at Antoine Court de Gebelin's Le Monde Primitif, analyses and comparisons with the modern world considered, right? The primitive world, as it is, analyzed and compared with the modern world and considered, right? And look at the date. It's 1781 is what that comes out to. So this is the first. I bring that up because that was the year that Uranus, the planet Uranus, was discovered. The revolutionary planet of Uranus was discovered the very year that de Gebelin first published his Le Monde Primitif. And I don't think that's accidental. I don't think any astrologer would tell you that's accidental. But it was a cool thing that it's the very year, right? So what we get is this. In Le Monde Primitif, in this cat's book, right, he had this other friend of his do an article in, I believe it was the 13th book of Le Monde Primitif. It was a many book, it was multiple volumes, right? And I thought it was the 13th book. He had this other guy called the Comte de Mallet, or the Comte de Mallet. And this was the first time in right around 1781, let's say a couple years afterward, where you finally get somebody who takes the tarot cards. So we're talking about tarot now. He takes the tarot cards and he assigns to them the Hebrew alphabet. So a lot of you are saying, no, Jamie, you're wrong because that was Eliphas Levi. And I'm telling you, I dare you to find out that I'm wrong about that. So because it's not the case. So the Comte de Millet, he was the first to attribute the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet to the 22 cards of the trumps or the major arcana. So this is the beginning of occult tarot. Look how serious and grave this cat is about it. He's like, this is the beginning of occult tarot, and I know it, and you know it, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. He knows it. So, moving forward with this occult transmission through the tarot, we find three very important figures. We find, of course, Eliphas Levi, or Louis Constant, or however, what was his whole name? I forget, Louis Constant. And he's a Gnostic saint, actually. Anyway, but Eliphas Levi is he also attributes the tarot card, or each letter of the Hebrew alphabet to the tarot cards, and he does what we call now the French school attributions. You know, um, where the fool is actually between judgment and the world. You know, the fool, the zero card, is between 21 and 22, uh, as opposed to our later attributions, which are uh, English, or in the UK there, um, where we find that the fool goes at Aleph. I'm going to have to presume that you all know your tarot correspondences. How Aleph is the magician, how Bet is the high priestess, or no, Bet is the magician. Sorry, Aleph is the fool, Bet is the magician, um, Gimel is the high priestess, etc. You know, we'll talk about that in a second because I'm going to get into the GD stuff. So we're talking about just to recenter us. We're talking about occult tarot and the transmission of occult tarot, and you get it through this cat for sure, but also these three. So Eliphas Levi on the continent, and Frederick Hockley and Kenneth Mackenzie in England. So Frederick Hockley, I think he was a friend of I know he was a friend of Yarker and Mackenzie, but also Theodore Rouse, right? Who was basically the early architect of the OTO. He was one of the people who really helped to put that together and codify that into a quasi Masonic order. This is before Crowley got a hold of it, but the Ordo Templi Orientis. Um, so there was a bunch of German and British cats who were what you call collectors of rights. And I'm digressing a bit, but you're all OTO people, so I feel like this is cool for me to talk about. Um, they were collectors of rights, right? So they sort of traded these rights, and OTO happened to be one of these other rights, like Memphis Mitzrayim and Elu Cohen, and all these sort of crazy rites that were not commonly practiced, and they would confer them upon each other in people's living rooms and stuff like that. And you would buy the rights to do these. You would buy the RIGHTS to confer the RITES um, of these sort of mysteries, right? So, and then you were conferred a certain title or whatever. And I know Hockley was up in that mix. Um, Mackenzie too was in that milieu, in terms of, you know, he was Sat Baha'i, he was the Society of Eight, he was SRIA, which is Societas Rosicruciana in Anglia. Um, so these guys really transmitted the taroic sort of knowledge, particularly him right here, but he would give all the credit to him. This guy would give all the credit to Hockley. But Kenneth Mackenzie was arguably the author of these cipher manuscripts. So I hope you've heard of these. So the cipher manuscripts, you know, all those correspondences that we talk about with the letters and how they correspond to elements and planets and signs and things, you know, and the tarot cards, the 22 trump cards, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, their elemental, planetary, and zodiacal correspondences, etc. We get this from a document, or from a series of documents called the Cipher Manuscript, that was found ostensibly among the items of Kenneth Mackenzie's. You know, Kenneth Mackenzie had died, and William Wynne Westcott went down to the south of England to retrieve these documents, because Westcott and Mathers, they were collectors of rights too. So these cats were all collectors of rights, as were Westcott and Mathers. So Westcott went down to, I think it was Brighton or someplace in the south there, and he found these manuscripts, these 60 something, I think it was 60 folios, uh, completing this manuscript. Kuntz did the best job. Darcy Kuntz, a dear friend and brother of mine, did a sort of reissue and the most cleaned up and comprehensive version of these. So please look up this cat's books. I mean, they're incredible. I mean, they're so on point. Anyway, so he cleaned up the these correspondences, which we still use. So these are the basis of the Golden Dawn knowledge lectures. You've probably heard of those, right? The knowledge lectures. So this is where you first find in these folios, again, ostensibly presented by Kenneth Mackenzie, this really eminent Freemason and Rosicrucian. This is where you first find all of this in one place. You know, the numbers of the paths. Look at the paths there on the tree of life, the neti vote or the paths, the name of the cards. This is, I'm sorry, but this is in a Trithemian cipher. This is one of Trimethius, who was actually the teacher of Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa. Anyway, Mackenzie was known to use this certain cipher. That's why they're called the cipher manuscripts, because he wrote them in this cipher. Anyway, so this is where we find, here's what I'm trying to say. This is where we find the elements, the planets, and the signs attributed to the tarot cards, right? This is where we find them yoked for the first time in this comprehensible method, right? Where it's a complete system. Take that as an aside, because remember, we were just talking about the trump cards of the tarot. The trump cards are just those 22 cards that are appended to essentially a regular playing card deck, right? But we still have all those what you call pip cards, right? And the pip cards are the numbered cards. So you know that Mathers and Harriet Falcon right here did the book T, they call it. This was the cover of it, the book T. And the book T is where they finally made these associations between the decans, or the 10-degree arc segments of the ecliptic in each sign, and they attributed a tarot card to each of them. So keep that in mind, that the pip cards have what's called a decanal correspondence to the zodiac, because they each correspond to one of the 36 decans, which are, as the name implies, 10-degree arc segments of the ecliptic. I know this is difficult. I know this is abstruse, and I know I'm throwing around these crazy names and all these weird terms and things like that. But just trust me, we're going someplace with this. So, you know the tarot. You know these 22 cards. Now, all right, let me digress again, because I'm a Tarot de Marseille guy. I just love the Marseille deck. You know, I know a lot of you are probably Waite or Thoth deck or things like that, and that's fine. They're great. I'm a Marseille cat, and the reason why is because they're so close to the bone. I mean, they are so visceral and so sort of simple and austere, and the symbolism is just intact without saying too much. It's so, I don't want to sell you on the Marseille, but I just love them, right? And they really speak to me. Follow your own heart in terms of that. But these are the 22 trump cards of the Marseille deck. These are the 36 plus 12 is 48. These are the 48 cards, you know, the pip cards, i.e. numbered cards, and the court cards of the, and I think they're actually even missing 4, but whatever. These are the minor arcana, we'll call them, right? That's what they've been, that's what Waite would call them, the minor arcana. So let's do this. Here's what I wanted to show you. There is a way to correspond this astrological information to the tarot cards, and it's per this stuff. These correspondences, if you look into this and you learn these correspondences, it's actually like first knowledge lecture stuff in the GD. It's like the first stuff you learn. And I know if you've ever read Regardi's Big Black Brick or whatever, you have to learn these. I mean, these are very important in modern Western esotericism. You're not going to understand GD or AA or OTO or the manner of our correspondences. You're certainly not going to understand Crowley until you know this stuff, because he was steeped in this. He knew this front and back. Yeah, he made a couple of innovations, right? But he first learned this. He learned this, and he knew it so goddamn well. He was a master of this. So let's put this into practice. So again, like I was saying, you're not going to be you're not going to be fully conversant in astrology, right? Unless you learn the ethos and the practical application of astrology, right? It's difficult to learn. It's an abstruse art, like we've been saying. There's a lot of doctrinal stuff that sort of needs to go on for you to learn astrology in any proficient kind of way, because it's a complex art. It's not, again, it's not the hippie new age tripe that we encounter today. And that's not how Crowley looked at it. That's not how Hockley and Mackenzie and Levy and all these cats looked at it. They knew what astrology was, and they knew its value. So let's take that as an aside, right? Now, let's also take the tarot cards, because this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to show you how you don't have to learn all the astrology, though you should, but you don't have to, because you have recourse to tarot cards. And tarot cards correspond to astrological placements. That's the whole thing I'm trying to tell you here. Let me tell you in one, maybe I could have done this presentation in 5 seconds, because here's what it is. You have to know the astrological correspondences to tarot cards, and thereby you can use tarot cards as a Rosetta Stone for astrology. You know, they decode it, and they mean essentially the same thing, which is what I'm going to try and show you right now. So look at this chart. This is the chart of Hiroshima when it was bombed, you know, the Enola Gay and that whole thing in 1945. This is a very notable chart, and it's been picked over by many, many mundane astrologers over the year. Mundane being worldly political astrologers over the years. But check this out. So, so you have the Fool, which in modern attributions, now here's where you're going to have to take a leap with me. Some people say, yes, the Fool is Aleph or air, just as the Hanged Man is Mem or water, and Judgment is Shin or fire, right? So you have those 3 elemental correspondences per the cipher manuscript. Well, you also get these. If you do, like Crowley, figure in some of the modern planets, Aleph and the Fool is also Uranus. Mem, or the Hanged Man, is also Neptune, water, right? Sheen, or Judgment, is also Pluto, fire and destruction, right? So Just think about that. These are filtering in some of the more modern attributions that actually Crowley did a lot to establish. So think about this. The Fool, Lamet, is Uranus. Look at Uranus conjunct the MC here in an air sign, in Gemini, an air sign. Uranus, Lord of the sixth house of illness, right? Slavery, suffering, and illness. Uranus, Lord of the sixth house, conjunct the MC. You know this is going to be a gnarly air attack. In Gemini on the 10th house, Gemini, air sign, 10th house, this very projective sort of status, right? This whole kind of like, I'm going to lord it over you, right? Co-present with Mars, destruction, chaos, death, Mars, the whole martial sort of uh, complex of significations that surround Mars. That's just a fantastic, not in a good way, but I mean, it's a terrible placement. Exactly conjunct the MC or the midheaven with Mars co-present. Domicile Lord of the eighth house. Mars is the Lord of the eighth house. Mars rules Aries. So he's importing some of these eighth house significations. And anybody who knows anything about astrology knows that the eighth house is death. It's the house of death and other people's money, which also figures into the equation, but we don't have to talk about socioeconomical geopolitics and things like that. But certainly this whole eighth house complex is imported via Mars into here. So that's me speaking in astrological terms. I'm just talking to you vis-a-vis mundane astrology. But what if I were to talk to you in the language of the tarot? So you know that if you were to take Uranus, you could spell him out as the Fool. You know that if you were to take Gemini, you could spell that out as the Lovers. And you know that if you were to take Mars, you could spell that out as the Tower, which is Pei, which is Mars. You know this. You've learned all this stuff, right? So look at this triptych of cards and tell me it doesn't mean the same exact thing that we're talking about in this 10th house complex here. Just by taking these two planets in sign, Uranus, Gemini, and Mars, and spelling them out in their corresponding tarot cards, we don't get the same picture. The Fool, just wandering into this thing, an attack from the air and full on destruction, right? Tell me how this doesn't say Hiroshima. It's the same thing. You can use tarot cards if you know your correspondences to spell out what we're talking about here because they mean the same thing. The imagery on the trump cards of the tarot spells out this astrological data. So you don't need to be a very proficient astrologer. You need to know your correspondences per the cipher manuscript, right? And I hope if you don't get this, I hope you keep in touch with me because there's nothing more that I like than getting emails for people saying, Jamie, I didn't quite understand that. Or Jaime. Call me Jamie, call me Jaime. I don't care. You could say, I didn't quite understand that. I will take an email from you and I would love to explain this to you because you gotta know this. I mean, it's so important. It's such a cool technique. In fact, I'm going to show you a couple more slides, but this technique, I actually wrote a maybe 3 or 5,000 word essay on this that's getting published in the next light extended volume. That's like some international journal of all the Golden Dawn traditions and stuff like that. I've been publishing in them for several years now. It's I wrote an article about this, or a piece, or an essay, or whatever it was. But this is fantastic stuff, and nobody's talking about it. Nobody's talking about it. So here's what you should do. Get in on the ground floor about what we're talking about here. We're talking about astrology and tarot as this sort of syncretic, synergistic method of really getting this information in one place and being able to pictorialize the placements, because we're talking again about this 10th house complex here, right here. That's what we mean. Let's do another one. This is also Hiroshima, but let's talk about a couple other houses here. Look, you see the sun. So this consciousness, this sort of central organizing principle that is in Leo. The sun rules Leo, and it's in the 12th house. The 12th house is the house of secret enemies. Secret enemies. So what was secret? I could tell you Pearl Harbor was a surprise attack, secret enemies. And I could tell you that the Enola Gay on Hiroshima was a surprise attack, secret enemies. This is 12th house stuff. This is what the 12th house actually means. Secret enemies, suffering, destruction, all manner of nastiness. That's 12th house stuff. So you look at the sun in domicile in the 12th house. By in domicile, I mean the sun rules Leo, right? And with Pluto, death and destruction, right? Judgment, sheen, fire from the sky, fire from the sky. Come to Jesus, destruction. I mean, apocalyptic destruction from the sky, from the sun, this source of nuclear fission, right? In the sky. And from that, this destructive force blowing the trumpets of revelation, right? This apocalyptic vision, right? And look at force, which is Leo, right? We assign strength to Leo. And that's this card per the Golden Dawn correspondences. Tell me again, since we've already looked at this one, tell me again that this one doesn't correspond to Hiroshima and what we were talking about. Tell me this doesn't pictorialize this very complex right here. The sun in Leo, co-present with Plutus, or Pluto rather. And Pluto is under, check this out. Pluto is under the beams. So whenever a planet this is astrological doctrine. I don't expect you to know this, but whenever any planet is within 15 degrees of the sun on either side, it is said to be under the beams. You know what that means? It's hidden. So there again, you get this hidden destruction that comes down from the sky with this fission, this nuclear fission, right? That epitomizes the sun. And that's what this is saying. That is what this is saying. Now I'm not a crazy guy, right? I mean, I'm talking about, I'm totally interested in this stuff. I don't think I'm reaching here. I don't think I'm like being like hyperbolic or nuts in talking about this, because I know a great deal about tarot and astrology. So, which is, well, I guess that's why they asked me to talk to you, right? If I was somebody who didn't know shit, or didn't know what I was, or had no thesis, I wouldn't be here talking to you, right? So this is this is serious. This is what is going on here. And what I'm saying is, you could, oh, look, we're going to talk about 9/11 now. So you could use this you can use the tarot to unpack this astrological symbolism and look at it pictorially, is why I'm so excited about it. Again, this could have been a 5-second presentation. I could have just told you that, but I could show you better than I can tell you. I'm going to show you. And I'm going to show you some more. Let's look at this one. We're looking at 9/11. I need more wine. I'm getting excited about this. Let me get more wine. So, or what I call it, the Mercury of the grape, because it's important. So here's what we're talking about with this next slide. We're talking about, let's look. I haven't looked at these in a couple of years, so no, you have the benefit of me like unraveling this in real time with you, because I haven't looked at this in a couple of years. So let's see what I was talking about 2 years ago. We were looking at 9/11. Saturn is in the second decan of Gemini, which is ruled by Mars. Saturn, right here, is in the second decan, the second 10-degree arc segment of Gemini. Again, an air sign attacking from the air. Saturn is, misery and suffering and circumscription, and also structure, though, right? The restructuring. Saturn is here in Gemini, this mutable air sign, mutable, changeable, so much change happening from this miserable destruction from the air. Co-present with the moon, which is emotions, and they're in the 9th house. So the 9th house is the house of, let's say, political and theological ideology. What the hell else do you call 9/11 but the exercise of political and theological ideology, right? And an attack and misery from the sky, and this emotive outburst. And look, it's opposing Pluto in the 3rd house, right? Let's look at another one. This is another look at 9/11. The sun, we're going to a different house now. Oh, secret enemies again. Remember, the 12th house is secret enemies. The sun in the second decan of Virgo on the 12th. Domicile of Mercury. Mercury is, this, well, Mercury. He's the mercurial kind of, look, he's right here on the ascendant. So this trickster, right? Secret enemies, the trickster. And he's conjunct the ascendant, a very conspicuous action. Very something that was like, planned and meant to be a spectacle. That's what I'm trying to say with this one. The sun and this mercurial thing, right conjunct the ascendant. This is a spectacle we're talking about. This is something that is meant to send a message. And who's the messenger? Mercury is the messenger, of course. Mercury's always the messenger. So now look at what we got going on here. We got the sun, we got Virgo, and we got Mercury. The sun, Virgo, and Mercury, which kind of tell this story. Anybody who's conversant with reading tarot can get this sort of narrative out of these. Same thing with this one. Look at this. The world, destruction of the house of God, right? Let's say. Look at this. If that's not 9/11, and look again, judgment. This revelatory apocalyptic call, right? And these graves in this hole in the ground. I don't know if you've ever been to, what do they call it? Freedom. I was just in the city over the weekend, and yeah, there's some, like, they have a hole in the ground that they call the I forget what they call it, but it's right on the site of it's ground zero, basically. That's what they're talking about here. That's what these cards say. That's the narrative in these cards is the same as the astrology. So we don't need to belabor it by getting into stuff like this, but I did want to say we don't need to go here right now because I'm so much more excited about the Q&A. Suffice it to say this. I can extrapolate this into every area of tarot and astrology and show how they are synergistic, mutually informative system. You don't need to know astrology or how to read a chart. What you do need to know is at least tarot, and you need to know the correspondences, the elemental, planetary, and zodiacal correspondences of the tarot. So I'm just saying this. If you don't know the first knowledge lecture of the GD system, you should learn that. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a call out in this. I mean, you're not going to get anything out of this unless you know the cosmological model that we talked about. You know, remember the Ptolemaic model with the Earth at the center, the 7 planetary spheres around it, and then the Ogdoad and the Ennead. You should know that. And upon that, you should build your knowledge of at least know some astrology, at least know what the little glyphs mean. When you see the symbol for Mercury right here, you know that that means Mercury. When you see the symbol for Virgo, you know that that means Virgo. Um, and 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 know your major arcana, at least the major arcana, and the Hebrew letters to which they correspond. Um, if you know that, then I promise you, you're going to be able to get so much depth, so much clarity out of events, out of your birthday. Let's say this. Oh God, I don't know if there's enough time to do this exercise, but um, maybe we'll do it at the end during the Q&A. Maybe I'll get. How about this? What if I got one of your? If any of you know your birth date, your location, and exact time of birth, put it in the Q&A. If you know your birth date, your location where you were born, and your exact time of birth, don't give me 6:30. I'm looking for 6:33, 6:37. I'm looking for a legit time. If you have a legit time that you were born, I will tell you the 3 cards that represent your sun, moon, and ascendant. And then we could look at you can look at those 3 cards on your own, or we could do this in a private text, or rather email later. But here's what I'm trying to say is you can take any information and you can transliterate it or transpose it into either the language of astrology, the language of the tarot, or the Hebrew alphabet and all of its correspondences, and you can penetrate the mysteries of any word, any event, or any name. It's the most mind-blowing exegetical sort of interpretive method you've ever tried in your life. And if you learn this, I promise you that it'll be rewarding. You know, I think that's about all I want to give up right now. And I hope I've been enthusiastic enough. I hope I hope I've inspired you, because this is massive. So here's what we talked about today. These are the key takeaways. It's basically a type of algebra. What I mean by that, what what the old me would have meant by that 2 years ago, and that was the old me. I've changed a lot in 2 years. What the old me would have meant by that is that you can form a sequence of variables in an equation. I know I would have talked like that way back then. You can form this sequence of variables in an equation, and you could plug in various values for those variables and have an algebraic expression. That's how I would have worded that probably. Tarot is a sort of Rosetta Stone for astrology. Tarot pictorially augments astrology. so you can spell out some astrological placement in the language of tarot and get deeper pictorial meaning out of it. Also, here's something to go with moving forward. Ritual composition, divination, and elections are heightened by this technique. You can only imagine how you can extrapolate this into your electional astrology, your divination, your theurgical practices, the composition of your rituals. So, this is the end. Um, Again, 1,000 thanks and 1,000 blessings to Jay Lee and Scott Plyler, my brothers. Many, many 93s to everybody else. And it's been fantastic. I'm gonna escape. I'm gonna stop sharing. And I'm sorry, maybe I've been annoying, which you wouldn't be the first. I'm not made of glass. You wouldn't be the first people to tell me I'm annoying and how gnarly I can be in terms of my presentation style. But anyway, many, many thanks.
And
And
thank you, Brother Jaime. We are going on to the Q&A session now. First off, there's one from early on in the presentation. Is there any relation between the Ogdoad and the Aeneid as you are explaining it, and the Egyptian mythos of the Ogdoad and the Aeneid?
well, yes and no. So the Ogdoad, um, sort of the Ennead in the Egyptian understanding is like the Neteru. We talk about the. I don't want to go off into that world right now, but there's the Neteru, these 9 gods, and the Egyptian Ennead and the Neteru. And whoever asked that must be talking about that. I know what they're talking about. It's not my area of expertise. And there's also the Enneads of Plotinus, the Neoplatonist. So, not so. I'm using those words more in their non-loaded kind of general sense, where the Ogdoad is the 8th sphere, and the Ennead is the 9th sphere. Because the Ennead, and if you know Greek, you know that those kind of work out like that.
Okay. I'm going to take a few of the questions out of order. Someone's wanting to know, what is your email where you can be reached?
Okay, so I actually don't know how to type something into Google, so I'm just going to say it. So if everybody's can grab a pen right now, because I'd
Well,
love to get it.
this is being recorded and it will be on YouTube.
I don't care.
No, I mean, they don't need to. They can write it down now, but if they don't write it down, they can get it later.
All right, so here's my email: JAIM like Mary, EP like Paul, AULLAM like Mary, B like boy, Jaime Paul Lamb at hotmail.com. Old school Hotmail. Jaime Paul Lamb at hotmail.com. Very easy.
Very good. Thank you, brother. A few folks have put in their birthday information, and someone was wondering whether this is going to be recorded. So I think since it is dealing with personal information, I will stop recording when we get to that section. But until then, we have other non-birthday related questions.
Yeah, let's do those first, because I'm actually outside having a smoke right now, so I can't punch in their data.
What were the first books or sources that you used to get acquainted with astrology? And how long did it take you to sift out the New Age garbage, as you put it?
All right, so I started out by taking the AFA, that's the American Federation of Astrologers. They were chartered in 1938. It's the oldest astrological society in America, and they're quasi-theosophical. And I mean that in the real, not the German Jakob Bema sense. I mean it in the like Blavatskyan sense. They were like a theosophical type of organization. And I started out by taking their astrology course, which was cool because it taught me how to erect a chart by hand. And in this day of like where you can just get online or any astrology program and erect a chart in 30 seconds, um, I used to erect charts and it would literally take you like 2, 3 hours. So there's a reason why they called astrologers mathematici. In the Greco-Roman era, they used to call them mathematici because you had to know a good deal of like trigonometry and some math and certainly some geometry, earth measurement, to know how to erect a chart. Now, there's no substitute for that. I don't care if you're learning about astrology now. You should definitely learn how to erect a chart by hand. So that means you need an ephemeris, and you need a table of houses, because it's the best way to get yourself as a microcosm. It's the best way to get your microcosm resonating with the cosmic macrocosm. You know, it's the basic Hermetic idea, as above, so below, or the Christian idea, on earth as it is in heaven, or the Mesopotamian idea, which precedes them both by a couple of millennia. Um, Evil portents in the sky correspond to evil portents on the earth. So it's this Masonic idea, really, of the correspondence between the terrestrial sphere and the celestial sphere. And there's no better way to get your body and your mind and your spirit and your soul sort of attuned to that connection, um, than by erecting a chart by hand. So that's how I started. And then I moved on to Chris Brennan. You ever hear of Chris Brennan, the Hellenistic astrologer? Well, I studied under him, and that's how I learned Hellenistic and Perso-Arabic astrology, which changed my life. So I've actually never fucked with hippie astrology. I'm just so disinterested in it. I was never interested in astrology until I found out that it was actually a highly complex and nuanced art, and that directly related to the foundations of the Western esoteric traditions. I had no idea. I thought it was just, again, hippie garbage. Um, and it is. That's the thing. It actually is. 99.9% of what you read on the Oracle, on Facebooks, or wherever these places people go, is tripe. It is trash. Don't listen to it. You have to go to Hellenistic and Perso-Arabic and medieval and maybe Renaissance sources like Ficino and certainly Agrippa and cats like that, where you're going to get the real astrology, particularly as it pertains to Western esoterica in general. And that's um, you're going to Crowley did it. I keep bringing him up because we're in an OTO thing right now, so I feel like I need to keep some touchstones there. But that's what I did. And then I learned Hellenistic astrology, which is the oldest astrology that there is. That's when astrology actually became a thing, in the Hellenistic era. So that was in Alexandria 2,000 years ago. I hope that helps.
As a follow-up, there was a question, recommended sources, which you've covered for astrology from the 101 level. Love the comparison with the theater play. Wasn't too clear about how the houses work until today. I would appreciate to learn more. So it sounds like you've covered that. He can email you directly.
Sure.
For follow-up. And what do you think about complex astrological tarot correspondences for the smaller astrological bodies, like how some apply both Aleph Fool and Tau World to the asteroid Chiron?
I don't know of those correspondences. And the only reason I'm not denigrating asteroid astrology, I think it's valuable, but for my money, like, all right, to be perfectly honest, I don't even use trans-Saturnian planets anymore. I stopped using Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto probably 2 years ago, probably right on the heels of when I composed this talk, because that's when I got deep into Hellenistic and Perso-Arabic astrology. So I don't even look at those planets anymore, nor do I look at asteroids. That's just me. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. There's a lot of value in that because, of course, asteroids and fixed stars and the zodiac and outer planets are important astrological bodies if you choose to get into that paradigm. And it's been my practice, just personally, this is just where I'm at right now. And this, as everything, I hope this changes within a year or two, because if you're not growing, if you're not saying to yourself every year or two, holy shit, I can't believe how wrong I was a couple of years ago, then you're in the wrong room, you know? Like, you should be learning. So, uh, so I'm telling you this, Mr. Asteroid person and asteroid attributions and correspondences, is I don't know right now.
Okay. Are there any other questions not pertaining to birthdays? Now, I believe in Crowley's book on astrology, he has a list of famous persons, their places of birth, and the times of birth as known. We could do an example from that to start with before we cut out the recording.
So you're talking about Crowley's Evangeline Adams ghostwriting?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I've read that. I have the hard copy version of that Hymenaeus Beta did all the sort of annotation to that. It's a brilliant book. I've worked through it, a couple of years ago or whenever it was, and it's fantastic. So I encourage you to get Crowley's, what's it called? Let me find it. I'm on my bookshelf right now. Can you see me?
I can see you.
Can you see this?
It's disappearing in the nebulae behind you.
Okay, so it's the General Principles of Astrology by Aleister Crowley with Evangeline Adams, and it's edited by Hymenaeus Beta. I would suggest starting there if you prefer the thelemic sort of Crowleyan perspective, which I imagine many of you do, which is fine. And it's great because I got to say, Crowley was a brilliant astrologer. He was just as Crowley was an imaginative Kabbalist. He was great. Like you remember the prelude in, I think it was book 4, where he did those preludes on popular myths and fairy tales. So he was just as imaginative and brilliant in his astrological perspective. And a lot of that shows in his ghostwriting for Evangeline Adams. So I encourage you to look at that, and you get brilliant, insightful, although sometimes wrong, annotation from Hymenaeus Beta.
And we have a comment, fantastic talk and a great presentation. So glad that I could attend. Thank you.
Well, I got to say that hopefully this transmitted, because it's all about the transmission, right? I hope you know that I'm excited about this, that I think it's valuable, that I've found innumerable avenues of interpretation that had previously not been open to me by unlocking these taroic astrological keys. And I hope that you pick up these working tools that I'm laying at your feet right now, free of charge. And you're taking these up and bringing this into your work, because I guarantee I don't guarantee much. I prefer to under promise and over deliver. But in this sense, I will overpromise, or maybe not. I will promise directly and say that there is a tremendous value in in well, let me say it this way. You have to learn at least the first knowledge lecture of the GD tradition.
Someone has placed 2 books in the chat. Some books, if you're interested, to build charts by hand. The American Ephemeris for the 20th Century, 1900 to 2000 at noon. There's
Sure.
an Amazon link. And Tables of Houses, Tableau de Maison, Häusertabellen, Tablas de Casas, Placidus latitude 1 through 66 degrees north and south. Also the link is there.
Those will work. I will say that the AFA table of houses is probably better because you can strictly get the ascendant and the MC. You need the ascendant and the midheaven because from there you could do porphyry houses. I'm not a Placidus guy. I don't do Placidus houses. I'm
And
not.
what's the difference between a Placidus and a porphyry house?
So they're different methods of what you call quadrant houses. So I got to say this if we're talking about that, and I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but in Hellenistic astrology, they used what was called whole sign houses. So that means that the signs and the houses shared cusps. So if you had Virgo on the second house, then the cusps of both the sign of Virgo and the second house were shared. So you used, yes, you found your ascendant and your midheaven, and from there you can get your Imam Coeli or your IC and your descendant because they're 180 degrees away from that. Again, I don't want to get too into the weeds mathematically, and it's easy to do when you're talking about that. But so porphyry houses are different than Placidus houses in that they're both quadrant house systems in that they divide a quadrant, a fourth or a 90-degree angle. Well, not always a 90-degree angle, depending on your celestial latitude or your terrestrial latitude. Anyway, I don't know. Let's not go there right now.
Okay. There's another question. Have you had as much tarot hermeneutics luck with French astrological tarot correspondences, Aleph equals magician, as you have with the GD astrological tarot correspondences of Aleph equals fool?
That's a brilliant question, and I commend whoever asked that, differentiating the French school from the, I guess, English school or the Western school, or from the continental French school. So yes, that's so if you're a reader of something like Meditations on the Tarot by Tomberg or Anonymous, or if you're interested in Eliphas Levy's taroic attributions, there is value there, but it's not my tradition because I'm decidedly sort of in the, frankly, I'm in the GD tradition. And so I use those and I've found a lot of value in them where Aleph is the fool is one is Ox, is Uranus, if you use outer planets, etc. But so no, I have not worked with the French or continental correspondences.
Excellent. And Angel Cortez has just asked me a question. Are there any social media accounts where I can know of upcoming virtual events, or should I check on the website eventually? The quickest way to do is on the website here. You can also subscribe to the OTO Facebook page. I put announcements up on there as well regarding upcoming presentations. And I believe that's it, except for the birthdays. So I will do the official thank you to Jaime, and thank you to the people who put in the questions. And say, love is the law, love under will.